Welcome to the Thin Places Travel Podcast, where we discuss places where the veil between this world and the eternal world is thin. I'm your host, Mindie Burgoyne.
There is no doubt, there is no place more beautiful on the planet, or more mystical, or more holy, or more ancient than the Skelligs.
And they're off the coast of Kerry.
Kerry. I mean, Luke Skywalker knows where it is.
I know.
Yes. So.
Welcome to episode 4 of the Thin Places Travel Podcast. Coming up, we'll hear from archaeologist Michael Moylan, who's from Connemara, and we'll talk about burial grounds and sacred spaces. Our featured destination in this episode is Omey Island, and I'll be recommending a book. In our last few episodes, we've really looked at what these thin places are. The places where the veil between this world and the eternal world is thin. We feel drawn to them. We can look at certain places where the ancients in Western Europe made them into royal sites and tombs and places of ritual. And today we're going to, in this episode, really look at burial grounds and the rituals associated with death. And if you think about the draw to thin places, it's really a draw to be connected, to have a sense of belonging to that landscape. There's something in a place that sort of pulls us, or when we're there, in some way completes us. It's about connection, a life force that sort of buzzes through every living thing and through us. And somehow in certain places, in these thin places, it seems to vibrate at a higher level. Seems to give us energy. So when you think about the death process, death, physical death, is the ultimate connection to the landscape. Even though our physical bodies, when we die, they go back into the earth. They become again one with the earth and the landscape. So it is kind of the ultimate connection. And there's a mystery in that reality and in that concept. I'm really lucky in that I'm somebody that has seen a birth. I watched 4 of my grandchildren be born. I mean, I had 3 children, but I wouldn't say I was witnessing the birth. But to watch a human being be born is a mystical experience. Time literally stands still. You are totally and completely full in that moment. Out from the womb comes this little person who is now going to live in the world. And there's so much possibility and so much promise and opportunities. There's potential, and you wonder all the things that will happen to this little person. How long will the life be? Will they have children? Will I be there for the person? Will they be happy? It's the ultimate beginning. And I'm also somebody that has witnessed death. And when you remove yourself from the grief of those moments when a person leaves the body dies and the spirit leaves the body, it is in a way similar to the birth process in that time stands still and something major is happening. Instead of the ultimate beginning, it is the ultimate ending. There are no more possibilities. There are no more opportunities. There is no more potential. Something has been crossed and it can never return. The body is done. The body that once hugged you or the hand that you held is just a shell. And the realization, the revelation in that moment, that truth is stunning. Similar to the way the birth process is stunning. And it makes me think of that passage by John O'Donohue, the poet and mystic John O'Donohue. I don't know if this is in a book, but I heard it in an audio presentation where he asked if you could speak to a baby in the womb in its last month and the baby could really understand you, and you were to say to that baby, in a few weeks, very soon, you are going to leave that place and you will be alone. You will be apart. You will not be connected anymore. You'll feel cold. You'll hear loud noises. You will be hungry. You'll learn how to cry. And no matter what happens, you will never again belong the way you belong right now. That surely the baby, if it could understand you, would think it was going to die, when really it was going to be born. and go into another cycle of possibility and promise and potential. And so, if you look back at the way the ancients in Western Europe looked at the death process, it seems that they sort of understood this, that even though there was that stunning end, it had to be the passage to a new beginning, because every ending launches a new beginning. I mean, you look at how they crafted the passage tombs. You've all seen dolmens where you have two tall standing side stones with a cap on top. That's the remnant of an entryway into a tomb. So that might be the beginning, where you put the doorway and then craft a chamber around that, covered all up with rocks, then cover that up with dirt, which eventually grows grass. And what do you have? You have in the landscape a hill with a door, which looks very much like a cave. So it's a portal, an entry into perhaps a womb, the mother being earth. That's one speculation for what passage tombs meant. And these doorways had significance. We've seen Newgrange's doorway received the rays of the sun at the rise after the longest night of the year. So at the very beginning of light, when the days are getting shorter, that's the day that the sunrise penetrates that tomb. In La Crue, there's a cairn where the same thing happens at the equinox. There are sacred carvings on some of the stones around entryways and the curbstones. There's a collection of passage tombs in the Brickleave Mountains in County Roscommon and Sligo, where they come together, called Carrickeel passage tombs. And it's interesting about their openings. They're scattered, as I said, across a mountaintop. They're all kind of, willy-nilly placed. But every doorway of each tomb faces the sacred mountain in the distance about 20 or 30 miles ahead, which is Knocknarea. If nothing, the way they crafted these tombs and these ritual sites, these burial grounds, can be an inspiration to us to consider that death isn't the end of everything. It is just the end of one cycle. And I'm always encouraged that traveling to thin places is a wonderful healing experience for people who are grieving, because that connection to the landscape really can seep into our souls and sort of heal that grief. I'm amazed at how many widows attend my tours. I don't realize it till they get there, but there's something about the draw to that landscape that I think inherently or intuitively we know has a presence of healing in it, that sacred landscape. In our next segment, we're going to talk to Michael Moylan. And last May, I was lucky enough to meet Michael in Connemara, where he's from. He's an archaeologist. And he told me that he had heard about a burial ground that was sort of being uncovered, sort of washed away by the tide. And he was going to investigate that, and I could join him there. And I did join him. And by the time I got there, he had uncovered several graves on the beach. And we'll let you listen to that interview to find out what happened there. But one thing I want to clarify before we play the interview is there were two skeletons on the beach. One was of a man and one was of a baby. And Michael makes a reference to the baby being buried outside the burial ground, the sacred ground, the consecrated ground, which most burials are done east to west, so the person is facing east. But in the days of the new religion, or the days of the Catholic Church in Ireland, there was a belief that unbaptized babies could not go to heaven, and so therefore they could not be buried in consecrated ground. So they were often buried outside the consecrated ground, and they would not be buried east to west. Also, in this unconsecrated ground, you might have strangers, or people that committed suicide, or people who were never baptized, or people that were outside the church. They would not be buried in the consecrated ground. And just so you understand that concept, to make what Michael says more clear, I think that would be helpful for you to know. Secondly, since this is such a tragic thing, all of these unconsecrated burial places, they're also unmarked. There's a big movement in Ireland now, a very positive movement to sort of find these burial grounds where they were. The people of the villages know where they were, and they're sort of seeking them out and reconsecrating them and rebringing them back into the fold of the community, the spiritual community, which is a very, very positive thing, and in its own way as a way to heal the landscape and heal the hurt within the landscape. So we'll go on over to Michael now. Okay, I'm here with Michael Moylan, who lives in Ardmore in County Galway. He's an archaeologist and a tour operator. Glad to have you here, Michael. Thanks for talking to me today.
Thank you, Mindie.
And tell us a little bit about what you do in your tours.
Well, on our tours, I think we're the type of tour operator that's, and I hate to use that word, stays off the beaten track. But we do, in all honesty, try to avoid the big, what we call the tourist traps. We think that tourists nowadays, maybe because of the advent of the internet, and they are definitely they're more knowledgeable, more informed when they arrive in Ireland, that the days of looking for the leprechaun at the bottom of the garden, I should hope is over. And we would definitely try to avoid looking for leprechauns, unless it's at 5 o'clock in the morning after drinking a lot of poaching. But that's what we do. We go into sites that are definitely off the beaten track. We're big into our mythology. We like the ancient pagan gods that used to rule Ireland. And we search for that, the standing stones, the old tombs, ancient burial grounds, obviously. And we love the monastic sites and the offshore islands, which lots of times are very hard to get to. Mm-hmm. So don't like to disappoint people that come on tour with us, but there will be days that we will not be able to get on the sea. But that's what we do. We firmly believe in that. We like small groups because then we can interact. We like consensus, so that when we meet in the morning, that we'll say, where do you guys want to go today? We can change the schedule to suit everybody. You come, obviously, to Ireland with the mindset of what you're going to get to do. And lots of times you can't fulfill that because while we are a small country, it still takes a while to get around it. So I think the people that we're looking at are the people who come and want to meet people and to walk away saying, yeah, we've experienced and lived a part of that, especially if you're interested in that part of our history or part of our culture. And that's where we're at. And when I say we, that's myself and Michael Gibbons.
Michael Gibbons, yeah, he's your partner.
Yes.
So let's say we met in Clifton and you were going to say, what do you want to do today? How would you approach that with a group of tourists, a small group? What would you say? Where do you want to go today if we were in Connemara?
Yeah, well, lots of times because you're out and walking, usually we meet them the night before. So yeah. So we usually have the general chat. What we do is we meet the night before. We do Connemara, an overall of Connemara, and that'll tie in the folklore, the history, the Wild Atlantic Way, as it's called now, which we used to refer to as our maritime highway because everything moved along the western seaboard when there was no roads into the community of Connemara, and then we get a general feel, what people want to do. We look at Omey Island because it's so old. It's very historical. Saint Fechin came from Omey. We know he existed. There's a lot of our saints didn't exist, but the ones that did exist, we're well familiar with them. He did travel to the northeast of England in the 6th century when they were trying to rearrange the calendar, for the Christian church. But he walked away. He preferred the Irish early Celtic religion, and he did come back, along with a lot of his other saints that went on to become saints. And I think they just called them saints because they were holy people. It didn't necessarily mean that they had to be canonized. I think if my granny died and she was a good person, she'd become a saint as well, almost in the village. But that's what we do. Then we would probably visit. I'm not saying that, the top of our itinerary would be Kylemore Abbey.
Yes, but that mountain
beautiful. But we would do the mountain walk across from Kylemore Abbey, and we would look back on the Abbey, which actually probably takes in how the Mitchell family viewed the landscape, because that's where he drew his water from. That's where he got the stone to build his castle. And there is a lot of archaeology in that landscape, and it's very old. So we do have an early Christian burial site there. We have an unusual burial site there because we're not sure because they're not facing east-west like a lot of the Christians were, so they could face the rising Christ after the resurrection of themselves. So we're not sure if they were criminals, if they were Protestants, if whatever they were. Was it before or after the Reformation? But there is kind of another burial site there, and I can't call it Christian. We have we have an old tomb there, a Megalithic tomb. There's a lot of stuff to do, of course.
If you want to be out in the landscape. Well, just on that note, I'm here standing with Michael at the regional airport in Connemara. It's right on the water, and it's where the planes fly in and out of the Aran Islands. And I only met him here because I had to drop someone off in this area. But he said to me, there's a site I wanted to look at by there anyway, so I'll go do that and wait till you get here. And when we got here, you had uncovered 2 skeletons on the beach, huh?
Yeah, and I didn't even have to place them there for you, this morning.
No, it was really perfect. What a surprise.
Yes.
But it was literally, when I walked down to the beach, I'll let Michael say this, but as a visitor walking with him, to walk down on the beach and see the head of a man and a shoulder uncovered in the sand from several hundred years ago, probably, and then a baby not too far away, and the beach there were bones sort of scattered all around. It was really an amazing experience for me. But why don't you talk about how that happened and how you knew to uncover them and who do you think they are and all of that?
Yeah, I guess we're here in Galway Bay, and I think when we were down on the bay, we were saying that the bay is constantly changing, because we're in a glacial bay, I guess, and we're in a glacial landscape, and we do know that about 10,000-12,000 years ago, the last great ice cap moved over this community and receded into the Atlantic and scoured our landscape as you can see it right now. But there is a rising tide. There was a rising tide before global warming became popular. We know that the basin of Galway Bay has risen probably 4 to 5 meters over the last 6,000-7,000 years. The burial ground that we see now was unearthed about 3 years ago after a major storm that came in from the Atlantic and pushed the whole ground, but probably for at least took 10 or 12 meters off the seafront and moved it in, which we now call Storm Beach. And in that Storm Beach, locals walking the shoreline after the storm seen bones and whatever in the beach stone. And that brought us, archaeologists, to look in the beach, because obviously that's where the grave was. If there was a grave, it was down in the shore, which is now the shore. So even like this morning now, while I was waiting for you to show up, walking along the top of, or in the bottom of the beach, I did see that little skull. I seen little bones, fragment of skull. So when I started cleaning up around it, I found the rest of it under the sand. But the other guy looks like he's a fully grown adult. He's totally intact. And I just seen a little bit of white in among the rocks as well. And I took the rocks away and just cleared away some of the sand, as you've seen yourself. Mm-hmm. It is. Some people find it, distressful maybe, because I feel for those people in one way, because you're looking, they didn't think that any other human being was going to look upon their face again when they were buried, or their loved ones buried them. And it's unfortunate, but I guess that's the change in climate.
And it's what happens. And you said something about the baby not being buried facing east and west. So
no, that baby is facing north-south, unfortunately for the baby. The baby may have died, probably did die before it was baptized. We unfortunately, our church in Ireland was a cruel church. I guess it's as simple as that parents bury their children knowing, according to the Catholic religion, that they were never going to see God, because they still had original sin on their souls. And they weren't buried east-west, and they're more likely buried marginally outside of probably the official consecrated ground of the graveyard, which is no longer there now because we can't see it. We don't even actually know where the walls were in and around that. But usually babies were buried outside the walls of consecrated ground or close to a shore, which was a no man's land, which was of no use to anybody. You couldn't till it. You didn't use it for any regular use. So you used it as a children's burial ground, and that's probably why that little baby was buried and just facing east-west, like the adult that was a little further along.
So the adult was facing east-west.
Definitely, yes. Yeah.
So he was a little outside.
He was. Yeah.
And one other thing you said as we were walking down there was there's still traces of the old potatoes in the ground.
Oh, yes, amazing. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people ask about that. They said, how come that there's still traces of the potato fields in the ground? And it is because they didn't get to harvest them. Obviously, we had the blight in the 1840s, 1845 to 1847. potatoes were sown. They were sown everywhere. And, of course, definitely along the shoreline because you were close to shore, you were close to the fertilizer, the seaweed that they pulled up, the sand to put on your potato fields. But you can still see what we call the lazy beds still in the landscapes all over Connemara, all over the country probably, because they never got harvested. So they're still there, so they're easy to pick out. Yeah, they're remnants of our past.
What's the forest? How many years old was it, did he say?
We have pre-bog forests. Well, there would be tree stumps, obviously. They are definitely between 4,500 and 5,000 years old because they're remnants of when Ireland was forested. So we right now, actually we did a documentary last year, and I guess in lieu of payment from the film group or the TV group that came in from Austria, is that they would carbon date some of the sites for us. And while we cannot mention the sites yet because it hasn't been broadcast yet, the carbon dating was phenomenal because it did put we got a general idea as to how long people have populated this coastal community, and we did push it back almost 1,000 years because we believed people lived here, but we had nothing to show on the ground that they were here until we found some areas of midden sites, bone, etc., old stone ruins and whatever that needed to be carbon dated, and it pushed the years of native archaeology here, like of human habitation in South Connemara, back over 1,000 years. That we'll be able to talk about more again in the future when they have their documentaries, when it's actually broadcast. But probably between 10,000 and we know that about 7,000 years ago that the country was totally forested. There was obviously cutaway afforestation and burning, and then of course, unfortunately for Ireland, it went through maybe 200 to 300 years of a very cold, wet spell, which saturated the ground, and that gave rise to the bog. The bog couldn't take all this water.
How long ago was that?
Our bogs are about 5,000 years old. Okay. So our bogs started to grow. So we know that anything pre-bog, whether it's a pre-bog wall or pre-bog settlement, that they are definitely over 5,000 years old. And we have the maritime forests as well, because we have areas like just off our coast here in around some of the islands that we have tree stumps, big large areas of it, in 3 to 5 meters of water. So that shows as well that Galway Bay is rising, or did rise considerably. Yeah.
So tell me something about the forest. Is it true that Ireland was forested? You always hear the tour guides say that Ireland was basically forested until the English came and tore down all the forests. But I know that that's not accurate.
Not totally accurate. We can blame them for a lot, but we have to stop somewhere. Yeah.
So what's the truth about that, of why Ireland isn't forested like it used to be?
Well, we did lose our, obviously, the slash and burn method when our nomadic people, like the hunter-gatherers, came into the country, same as that happens in South America or another, or in the Jav Islands, or it doesn't matter where they are, like in the South Seas where they're burning. That happened here as well. But we still had continuous growth of natural forest. And in fairness, I guess the British did cut a lot of our forest down during the 19th century because they needed wood. They needed wood to build their boats. The Royal Navy was becoming stronger and stronger. They were continuously at war. So they did cut some of our finest forests. Most definitely during the years after the famine, Irish people themselves definitely cut and slashed forests because they needed to survive. They were burned, for building, for burning, for fuel. And we did go through a period. As you can see, we are starting, the landscape is starting to reforest itself now as well, with a lot of hazel and different other native willow trees and whatever. Now, our forests that you see that grow are northern European spruce and pine. That they're forestry grown by the government and not native trees, but they're for the industry, yeah.
So let's say somebody was coming to Ireland and you wanted to tell them a couple of great things to see. What would you encourage them to not miss? What are some 3 wonderful things people can do in Ireland?
3 wonderful
Maybe
things.
that are not touristy, that aren't the things everybody does. Yeah,
unfortunately, I guess one of them is what everybody wants to do, and it's not in Connemara, and that is definitely going to the Skelligs. The Skelligs are. There is no doubt. There is no place more beautiful on the planet, or more mystical, or more holy, or more ancient than the Skelligs.
And they're off the coast of Kerry.
Kerry. I mean, Luke Skywalker knows where it is.
Know.
Yes.
So, and aren't they saying they're limiting who goes there now, right?
That is the downside of it, because the more people that arrive on the rock, because it is a rock, not necessarily an island, and I think it's over 700 feet high, it definitely is. It's going to destroy probably a lot of that landscape. So they will have to limit people coming to it.
So the Skelligs, yeah.
The Skelligs is one. But I mean, we would look at our own islands. We have the beautiful McDarra's Island, which has a 5th century church on it. We have Chapel Island off North Connemara. Beautiful little island as well. We have loads of islands. Of course, not to be missed, the Arden Islands. Right. The Arden Islands are beautiful.
All 3 of them? Is there something special on each one?
Yeah, they're all different. There's no doubt. They're all unique. The middle island in Ishmael, definitely the more traditional island, I guess, because it has the least tourists. So the people are still involved in the farming community and the old ways of living. In Ishir, closer to Clare, so it's a very lively, traditional, lots of good music. In Ishmore, I mean, it's been a haven for tourists going back centuries, even when it was very poor and very ancient. People met, they came to the Arden Islands. Our great writers, Synge, or Yeats, they all got inspiration, came to the Arden Islands, to soak it up. And definitely.
So the Skelligs visit an island, maybe the Arden Islands. What would one other thing be?
Well, we have. We do a tour. I mean, I guess we should. We don't advertise it, but we take small groups on it. We do a cave tour. We have all those fantastic caves.
Where are they? What caves are you going?
Those are caves now, like in North Connemara and whatever. Some of them are natural, and some of them are man-made, and some of them go back to Neolithic times.
And how long does it take to do a cave tour? Is it a day? Is it 2 days?
A day would get you in and out of 4 or 5 very beautiful caves, and they're up the side of mountains, so they're not that accessible. So they are for the.
You have to walk.
You have to walk. You have to be able to hike a little. Yeah. There's a lot of history attached to our caves. We have so many accounts of our rebels of various uprisings from the time of the Cromwellian wars to the 98 rebellion, all the way through even to the foundation of our own state of the Civil War, like between 1916 and 1922, where various rebels on the run hung out in those caves and were captured. So we tie historical events into those caves as well. Mm-hmm. So that's a good tour.
Yeah.
It's different.
That sounds great.
It is, yeah.
So how can people find you?
By calling you.
By calling me. Okay, I will. But what if they didn't want to go through me? What is your website again? It's Walking Tours? Or what is it?
It's Walk West.
Walk West. WalkWest.com? Yeah. WalkWest.com. Anyway, we'll have that. Come up, yeah. We'll have that in the show notes.
I don't know if you stick in Michael Gibbons.
Michael Gibbons.
Michael is famous.
Yeah, we know. I think you're famous too.
Yeah, well, I know. I'm the other Michael. I walk behind him in the shadow, and he tells me on a regular basis that I'm not learning anything from him. That I don't listen, and that I continually interrupt him.
Yeah, well, that's always a sign of precociousness. Yes. Well, anything else you want to say? Anything you can think of you'd like to add?
No, I think we're good. Yeah, I can't remember. God, and I'm on the spot. You'll be gone now, and I'll think of 10,000 things to do. No.
That's okay. Well, you can always email me. Well, thank you very much for the time. Yeah. And we'll have all of the information in the show notes. Thanks so much for this time.
Mindie. Thank you.
The travel destination that I want to highlight in this episode is Omey Island. So Omey Island is one of those rare places that is an island when the tide comes in. But when the tide is out, you can access it by foot or even by car. It's located off the western edge of Connemara in County Galway, kind of near where Cleggan is. And during the low tide, there's a very wide expanse of sand, no road, no paved anything, but the sand is very hard. We even took a small bus across the sand at one point. The locals would prefer that the visitors left their cars in the parking lot on the mainland and then walked over to save on the wear and tear on the island. But it is a beautiful, wild place. It's one of those rare places left in Ireland where nature has kind of taken back over. According to the Irish Central Statistics Office, there is no one left living full-time on the island anymore, although that could be changed. There certainly isn't a lot of full-time life there. There are cottages, there's cattle, there are summer homes, So there is private property, which visitors have to respect. But the careful and mindful traveler can have a wonderful experience there. The elements are very raw on Omi. The wind is amazing. The light is constantly changing. The landscape is hilly and as well as flat, boggy. There's a lake in the middle of the island. As you approach the island, there's an old graveyard off to the right. The wildflowers grow beautifully on Omi Island. And when I was first there, it was in the month of May, and the wild primroses were just all over the fields, all over the graves. It's really very, very peaceful, very much a vibrant landscape. The weather is dramatic. They say that Omi Island was the last holdout for paganism. Before the new religion came and the Irish were finally converted to Christianity, Omi Island was converted by its own saint, as Michael had referred to him, Saint Fechin. He started a monastic community in the 7th century, kind of obliterating the old pagan ways, finally. And he went on later to found other monasteries, including Fore Abbey in County Meath, which is what he's most famous for. But he started on Omi, and nothing, of course, is left of his original settlement. But there was another, church grew out of it. There is a church in the place where they believe he started his monastic settlement, a church ruin, that was excavated in 1981. And it's quite the unique ruin, because you come upon this ruin as you're walking sort of in this moorland, this flat area, and you just come over the crest of a little hill and you look down and you can see the church ruin there. There's 2 gable walls and 2 side walls, but it is in an impression in the ground that almost looks like a bowl. And this is because the wind literally blew the sand over top of it. And the excavation was the process of uncovering and moving the sand away. There was a little village there too, a village that was wiped out by the famine. Some stone huts that were uncovered. I took a tour of Omi Island with archaeologist Michael Moylan, who works with Michael Moylan. And if you get a chance to tour this island with one of these 2 guys, it is the difference between a stellar experience and an experience. Because they know the history, they know the paths, they know where to take you, they know the island. And I was lucky enough to be there with Michael. I remember inquiring about the famine village and asked Michael, did the local people just leave? Was there a mass exodus because of the hunger? And he said, actually, many of them were found in their cottages, that when the time came that they couldn't go on anymore, they simply went in the cottages and closed the door and lay down and died. So there's a little bit of that sadness there inside that memory where the ruin is. There's a holy well also on the island. And the mystical quality about Omi Island, I think, makes it so worth a day's visit. Be sure to check the tides. I have in the show notes the tide charts. There's also a place you can check into in the local village. They'll give you some information about the tides and how to handle yourself on Omi, or if you have any questions. Enjoy. It's a wonderful place to visit. I have a book to recommend called The Hidden Messages in Water by Dr. Masaru Emoto. He's a professor that practices in Japan. He wrote this book in 2001 and has written a whole series that follow it. But this is the first one, and it's an amazing account of an experimental process he went through with high-speed photography, photographing water crystals just as they were about to freeze or just as they were freezing. And he makes a lot of commentary about water and nature and the sort of vibrance and pulse in nature that connects us all. But in these photographs, he showed how the water crystals changed their shape, luminance, and color when they were exposed to positive and negative communication. So these methods of communicating could have been something so simple as to write messages of love and affirmation and gratitude in several languages on paper and folding the paper up and placing it near the water crystal and waiting. Some of them were spoken words. Some of it was the playing of music. But when positive, warm messages were imparted near the water crystals, they became colorful and bright and snowflake-shaped. And when the messages were negative or harsh, they became gray and less shapen. So the whole book goes into how our intent and our focus emotionally around nature can actually impact the nature around us. It makes a great case for healing the land, for drawing healing energy from the land. The link for it is in the show notes. Have a look. Again, that's Hidden Messages in Water by Dr. Masaru Emoto. Thank you for listening to the Thin Places Travel Podcast. If you have any questions or thoughts or travel stories or sites you'd like us to feature, you can find us on the web at thinplacespodcast.com. Just click the contact link. You can also find me on Twitter at TravelHags and on Facebook at facebook.com/thinplaces. We've got the show notes available for you on the website at thinplacespodcast.com, which has links to all the things we mentioned. And if you'd like any information about our tours to Thin Places, you can visit that website at thinplacestour.com. If you've enjoyed this episode, please give us a quick rating and review on iTunes under Thin Places Travel Podcast, and consider subscribing. In our next episode, our guest will be Kevin O'Shea, and he'll be talking to us about Dingle. So long for now. Thank you for listening, and please be sure to check out our tours to mystical sites at thinplacestour.com. The music for this podcast is Native Spirit, performed by Cheryl Ann Fulton from her collection, The Once and Future Harp. Goodbye for now, wishing you love and light and every blessing.